The set was quiet, more quiet than anyone expected for such a big film. Cameras stood ready, lights glowed softly, and the crew moved like shadows across the floor. In that silence, there was a moment that no one planned, a moment that would live forever in memory. Keanu Reeves, dressed in simple rehearsal clothes, turned his head toward Sandra Bullock. His eyes, calm yet filled with something unspoken, met hers. It lasted only a few seconds, but in those seconds the world seemed to stop. Sandra felt her cheeks warm, her heart beating faster, and though she tried to hide it, a gentle blush spread across her face. This was not just a scene between two actors. It was not lines on a page or marks on the ground where they were told to stand. It was something deeper, something human, something that could not be rehearsed. Sandra quickly looked away, pretending to adjust her script, but the moment had already passed through her like a spark of light in darkness. She did not need to say a word. Her blush said it all. The crew noticed too. Some smiled quietly, some looked away respectfully. It was not gossip, not entertainment, but respect for the silent bond between two people who had shared years of work, laughter, and trust. In a world of cameras and flashing lights, respect was often forgotten, but here it grew stronger. As the director called for the next rehearsal, Sandra tried to focus on her lines, but her mind wandered. She thought back to the first time she had met Keanu, years ago, on a different set. Back then, she was nervous, unsure of herself, still finding her place in the vast world of Hollywood. He had walked up to her with a quiet smile, offering simple words of encouragement that gave her strength. He did not speak much, but his silence carried comfort. Now, all these years later, that same comfort returned to her with just a look. But behind this gentle moment, there was conflict building. Sandra had been struggling quietly for weeks, though she did not let anyone know. The weight of the role, the pressure of fame, and the expectations of millions had left her restless at night. She smiled on set. She laughed in interviews, but inside she carried doubts. Was she still good enough? Could she still give her best when the world was watching so closely? She never spoke it aloud, but her eyes sometimes betrayed her. Keanu noticed. He always noticed the small things, the hidden signs people thought they kept to themselves. He did not ask in front of others. He never embarrassed her with questions she was not ready to answer. Instead, he chose moments of silence, moments where his presence itself was an answer, a nod, a glance, a small gesture of respect. He knew that sometimes kindness needed no words. The set moved forward with rehearsals, but the quiet tension inside Sandra remained. She remembered something her mother once told her, that even strong people have fragile days, and even the brightest smiles can hide storms. Perhaps today was her storm, and maybe that one look from Keanu was the shelter she did not know she needed. Then came an unexpected twist. During one scene, the director asked for changes that Sandra had not prepared for. Her lines were rewritten, her marks on the floor moved, and the timing of the entire exchange shifted. She froze for a moment, her mind blank. Cameras were waiting, crew members silent, and the air grew heavy with expectation. Keanu stepped in without hesitation. He adjusted his own performance to match her pause, giving her time, shielding her from the pressure of that moment. His improvisation turned what could have been an awkward mistake into something real, something more powerful than the script itself. The director smiled, impressed. The crew exhaled in relief. Sandra felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. He had protected her without making it obvious, without drawing attention, without stealing her space. It was the kind of kindness that only comes from humility. Later, when the cameras stopped and the lights dimmed, Sandra found herself sitting alone in a corner of the set. The weight of the day pressed down on her shoulders. She closed her eyes, trying to breathe. Then she heard footsteps. Soft, steady, respectful. Keanu sat down beside her without a word. They stayed like that for a while, silence filling the air between them. Finally, he spoke in a voice so gentle it felt more like a whisper. "You did good today." She opened her eyes and looked at him. He wasn't looking for thanks, he wasn't asking for praise. He was simply offering honesty. Her blush returned, not from embarrassment this time, but from the quiet warmth of being seen, truly seen, in a world where so many only looked at her surface. That night, as she went home, Sandra replayed the day in her mind, the moment of eye contact, the unexpected blush, The pressure, the rescue, the silence, the words. She realized something important. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about resilience, about standing up again, and about the people who stood quietly beside you when you almost fell. In the glow of streetlights, she whispered to herself, respect, kindness, humility. The values that mattered more than fame, more than scripts, more than cameras. And she knew this was only the beginning of a story that would change her more deeply than any role she ever played. The next morning, the set buzzed with energy. The air was heavy with the smell of coffee, makeup powder, and freshly painted props. But for Sandra, it wasn't just another day at work. Her thoughts still circled around the night before, the way Keanu's quiet words had softened her storm. As she stepped onto the set, she wondered if anyone else had felt that same calmness he carried, the kind that settled like sunlight on cold skin. As cameras rolled again, Sandra walked to her mark, and once more her eyes met his. This time it was different. There was no sudden blush, no sharp surprise. Instead, there was recognition, as if both of them silently acknowledged what had happened yesterday. In that brief connection, she realized something. Sometimes a single moment doesn't fade. Sometimes it lingers, reshaping the way you see everything around you. The director called out instructions, but Sandra hardly heard them. She felt an odd mix of nerves and peace. It was strange. Peace because she knew Keanu would never let her stumble alone. And nerves because she wasn't sure how long she could keep her feelings hidden behind professional smiles. As the first scene of the day began, Sandra found herself once again struggling with the pressure. She had to deliver lines with sharp timing while hitting emotional beats that were raw and fragile. It wasn't just acting. It was vulnerability on display. Her voice trembled on the first take, and the director frowned slightly. The second take went smoother, but she still felt the weight of invisible judgment pressing in. Then came a moment no one expected. In the middle of their exchange, a loud crash echoed across the set. One of the heavy lights from above slipped from its rig and fell to the floor, shattering into sparks and smoke. The entire crew gasped. Instinctively, Keanu reached out, pulling Sandra a step back, shielding her with his body before anyone else could even react. For a second, there was silence again. Her heart pounded, her breath caught, and the world seemed to shrink down to the space between them. She felt the steady grip of his hand on her arm, not forceful but protective. His eyes locked on hers again, this time filled with concern instead of calm. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low but steady. She nodded, still shaken. The crew rushed in to clean up, voices loud with panic and instructions. But in that whirlwind, Sandra realized something. His first thought wasn't about himself, not even about the scene they were working on. It was about her. It was about making sure she was safe. After the chaos settled, the director called for a short break. Sandra found herself sitting in a quiet corner again, but this time she wasn't alone. Keanu sat beside her the same way he had the night before. There was no need for words right away. Silence had become their shared language. But today, Sandra felt the need to break that silence. "Why do you always notice before anyone else?" she asked softly. Keanu thought for a moment before answering. "Because people forget to look closely. They see what's loud, what's shining. But the truth is always in the quiet things." His answer struck her deeply. She had spent years in a world that thrived on noise. Interviews, red carpets, flashing cameras. Everyone wanted to be seen, but very few wanted to truly see others. And here was a man who built his life on noticing what most ignored. Throughout the rest of the day, Sandra carried that thought with her. She noticed how Keanu treated every crew member with respect, no matter their role. He spoke to the assistant carrying water with the same kindness he showed the producers. He listened when others spoke, never rushing them, never dismissing their words. In a place where egos often filled the air thicker than smoke, his humility was rare, almost sacred. As the sun dipped low and the golden light filtered through the tall windows of the studio, the final scene of the day was set. It was an emotional exchange between their characters, written to be heavy with tension and longing. The director wanted it real, raw, filled with something that couldn't be faked. Sandra felt her chest tighten. She wasn't sure if she could deliver that kind of truth on command. But when the cameras rolled, something unexpected happened again. Keanu looked at her, not as a co-star, not as a character, but as a person. His eyes carried a softness that pulled the words out of her without force. The lines she spoke came alive, trembling with real emotion. She felt tears well up, not because the script demanded them, but because she could not hold them back. When the director shouted, "Cut!" the room was silent for a moment. Then applause broke out, not polite but heartfelt. The crew had seen something rare, truth in performance, born not from acting but from connection. Sandra wiped her tears quickly, embarrassed, but Keanu only offered a small smile. He didn't need to say anything. He didn't need to remind her that she had done well. His presence alone said it. That night, as she drove home under the city lights, Sandra thought about the day again and again. The falling light, his protective hand, his words about noticing the quiet things, the way he made her feel safe, seen, respected. She whispered to herself, "It's not just acting anymore." But with that whisper came fear. What if she was reading too much into these moments? What if she let her heart believe in something that wasn't there? The world loved to create stories where none existed. Gossip spread faster than truth. She knew the risks. But she also knew how rare it was to feel this way, to feel deeply understood without needing to explain. She parked her car outside her home and sat still for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. Part of her wanted to push the feelings away, bury them beneath professionalism, protect herself from disappointment. But another part whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something she could not ignore. She closed her eyes and held on to one thought, the look in his eyes when the light had fallen. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't rehearsed. It was real. The third day on set began with heavy clouds hanging outside the studio windows, the kind of gray sky that makes the air feel thick, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Inside, the atmosphere mirrored the weather. There was tension in the air, not just in the script they were about to perform, but in the unspoken emotions that had been building between Keanu and Sandra. As Sandra walked in, she noticed Keanu already on set, sitting quietly at the edge of the stage, flipping through his script. He wasn't rehearsing the lines. He seemed far away, his thoughts drifting into places no one could reach. She hesitated before stepping closer, sensing that something was different today. The crew buzzed around, adjusting lights, moving props, checking sound levels. But Sandra's focus stayed on him. She had grown used to the calm strength he always carried, but today there was something heavier in his silence. The director called for rehearsal. The scene they were about to shoot was one of the most emotionally charged of the film, a confrontation between their characters filled with pain, regret, and unsaid words. The lines were written to cut deep, but Sandra felt nervous. She wondered how much of the performance would be acting and how much would be the emotions she had been trying to hide. When the cameras began to roll, Keanu's eyes met hers again, and she felt a jolt. There was no shield this time, no gentle calm. His gaze carried a weight that made her chest ache. The words she spoke trembled with rawness. Every line he delivered came out heavy, almost too real, as if he wasn't just acting, but letting pieces of his own soul bleed into the performance. The director shouted, "Cut," but the silence that followed lingered longer than usual. Sandra stood frozen, staring at him, sensing that what had just happened went beyond the boundaries of the scene. She wanted to ask him if he was okay, but before she could, he quietly stepped away from the stage and disappeared into the dim hallway behind the set. Her heart raced. Should she follow him? Should she respect his space? The battle played out inside her. Finally, she made a decision. She followed. The hallway was quiet, the distant hum of the crew faint behind her. She found him standing near a window, the gray sky casting a pale light across his face. His expression was unreadable, but his shoulders carried a weight she had never seen before. "Keanu," she said softly. He turned, startled, but then gave a small smile. "Sorry, I just needed a minute." She stepped closer. That scene, it felt different, like it wasn't just acting. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. pain that went deeper than words. "Sometimes the lines bring up things you try to forget," he whispered. She didn't push for details. She knew that everyone carried battles others couldn't see. Instead, she simply stood beside him close enough that he would know he wasn't alone, but far enough to let him keep his silence. The director called them back. But for Sandra, that moment by the window stayed with her. She realized something important. Behind Keanu's kindness and humility, behind his quiet strength, there were wounds. And maybe that was why he noticed the quiet things in others. Because he knew what it was like to carry storms inside without showing them to the world. The day continued with heavy scenes. Each time they performed, Sandra felt herself drawn deeper, not just into her character, but into the unspoken connection between them. She found herself wondering about his past, about the struggles he never mentioned, about the reasons behind the sorrow that sometimes flickered in his eyes. During lunch, the crew gathered around tables filled with food, but Keanu sat alone with a simple meal. Sandra hesitated before joining him. When she sat down, he looked at her and smiled, a smile that didn't hide his tiredness. "You didn't have to sit here," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. "Sometimes silence feels better when you're not in it alone." He gave a quiet laugh. "You really notice things too." Her heart softened at those words. She wanted to ask him more, wanted to understand him. But before she could, the assistant director called them back to set. The final scene of the day was intense. It required both of them to cry, to let go, to bear emotions without restraint. Sandra doubted herself. Could she fall that deep again? Could she let the cameras capture her without walls? But when Keanu looked at her during the take, everything inside her broke open. The tears came without effort, the trembling words felt real, and when it was over, she collapsed into his arms, not as part of the script, but as herself. He held her tightly, steadying her. The crew grew silent again, realizing they were watching something far more human than performance. The director too moved to speak, let the moment linger before softly whispering, "Cut." When the lights dimmed, Sandra pulled back slightly, her eyes wet. "How do you do it?" she asked him. "How do you carry so much and still stand so calm?" Keanu paused, then said, "Because life has already taken so much. I learned long ago that anger doesn't heal. Kindness does. Humility does. Resilience does. It's the only way forward." His words sank into her like stone dropped into water, rippling through her heart. She realized then that what she felt wasn't just admiration, it wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something she was afraid to name. As the day ended, Sandra sat in her car again, staring out at the night sky. She whispered to herself, "He's more than I thought. He's carrying stories the world will never know." But with that thought came a new question. If she let herself feel too much, would she risk losing him, even as a friend? And yet, another voice inside her whispered that maybe the greatest risks were the ones worth taking. The fourth day began with noise, the kind of noise that comes not from the set itself, but from the world outside it. Flashes from cameras, voices calling names, the low hum of reporters waiting near the studio gates. Sandra had grown used to it over the years, but today it felt heavier, sharper, more invasive. As she stepped out of her car, microphones pointed her way. Questions cut through the morning air. "Sandra, is it true you and Keanu are closer than ever? People are saying the chemistry isn't just on screen. Any comment?" She kept her head down, her polite smile fixed, but inside her chest tightened. Gossip had found its way in. And gossip, she knew, could destroy something fragile before it even had the chance to grow. Inside the studio, the air was different. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. Crew members tried not to stare, but she could feel it. And then she saw him. Keanu standing by the coffee table, his face calm as always, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of weariness. He had heard it too. When their eyes met, there was a silent question between them. How much of what they had felt was now under the weight of someone else's story? The director called them to set quickly, hoping to drown the noise with work. Today's scene was delicate. It was not about confrontation or tears, but about quiet intimacy. Their characters were meant to share a simple conversation, filled with pauses, silences, and unspoken tension. But now, with the outside world pressing in, the silence between them felt heavier than the script intended. When the cameras rolled, Keanu's voice carried a new edge, softer but heavier, as if he was speaking not only to her character but to her. Sandra's lines came out trembling, not because she was acting nervous, but because she was nervous. Their pauses were not rehearsed. They were real moments of hesitation, breaths where they tried to push aside the noise and find each other again. The director was stunned. When he called cut, he leaned forward, whispering to the crew, "This is the kind of silence that makes audiences lean closer." But neither Sandra nor Keanu heard him. They were caught in something else, something private, something neither of them dared to name. During the break, Sandra found herself walking alone down the quiet corridor, trying to steady her breath. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. It was Keanu. He didn't speak at first. He just walked beside her, his presence steady, respectful, grounding. Finally, he said softly, "Ignore them. People will always build stories. Let them. We don't have to live by their words." She looked at him, the frustration in her chest spilling over. "But it changes things. It makes every glance, every word feel watched." He paused, then replied, "Then let's not let them steal what's real." His words hit her harder than she expected. What was real? Was it the unplanned looks, the blush, the comfort, the tears? Or was it just the illusion of a story written by chance moments? She didn't know. But she wanted to believe him. Later that afternoon, they were asked to shoot a scene outdoors, away from the safety of the closed set. The location was a public street dressed up for the film, and though the production had cleared most of it, paparazzi still lingered at the edges, their cameras ready. Sandra felt the weight of their presence pressing into her chest. The scene required them to walk side by side, speaking in quiet tones. But as soon as the director called action, flashes erupted from behind the barricades. Sandra's steps faltered, her concentration shattered. Keanu noticed. Without breaking character, he reached out and gently placed his hand on hers, steadying her. It was a simple gesture, part of the script, yet at that moment it became more than acting. The world outside wanted to capture something scandalous, but what they saw instead was respect, kindness, and strength. When the take ended, she squeezed his hand slightly before letting go. It was her way of saying thank you, her way of letting him know that even in the chaos, she felt safe beside him. As the day came to an end, Sandra sat in her trailer, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The rumors had already started spreading online. Pictures of them together, headlines twisting their silence into drama. She feared what it might do to the film, to their careers, to the delicate bond that was forming quietly between them. A knock came at her door. She opened it to find Keanu standing there, holding 2 cups of tea. "Thought you could use this," he said simply. She smiled faintly, taking the cup. "Thank you." They sat across from each other in the small trailer, sipping tea in silence. Finally, she spoke. "Why are you always so calm? Don't you care what people say?" He looked at her with that same steady gaze. "I've learned something, Sandra. The world will always talk, sometimes with love, sometimes with cruelty. If you start chasing their voices, you'll never hear your own. I choose to stay quiet because silence can't be twisted." His words struck her again, deep in a place she couldn't quite name. She realized that while she feared the rumors, he carried them with grace. Not because they didn't matter, but because he refused to let them define him. As she watched him sip his tea, she felt something inside her shift. This wasn't just about 2 actors on a set anymore. This was about learning how to stand in storms without losing yourself, about finding someone who could remind you of your own strength when you forgot it. That night, as she lay in bed, the whispers of the media still echoed in her mind. But louder than that was the memory of his words. "Let's not let them steal what's real." She didn't know what was real yet, not fully, but she knew she didn't want to lose it. The 5th day arrived with a strange kind of stillness, as if the world had paused just long enough to let something hidden surface. Sandra woke with a restless feeling in her chest, one she couldn't quite name. The whispers from the media hadn't stopped. They had grown louder. But today her unease wasn't about cameras or rumors. It was about herself. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was polished, smiling, the version of herself the world always saw. But beneath the surface, she felt cracks. Doubts about her place in Hollywood, questions about whether she had done enough, given enough, lived enough. And somewhere in those cracks was a fear she had never admitted, not even to herself, that maybe the kindness she felt from Keanu was something she didn't deserve. When she arrived at the set, Keanu was already there. He stood alone in the corner, reading quietly. Not the script this time, but a small, worn notebook. His eyes were heavy, his posture calm but distant, as if the weight of something private rested on his shoulders. She hesitated before approaching. "Morning," she said softly. He closed the notebook and smiled faintly. "Morning." She wanted to ask about the notebook, but his expression told her it held something personal, something fragile. Still, the curiosity lingered. What stories did he write down? What thoughts did he keep locked away from the world? The day's scenes were difficult, heavy with emotion. They had to play out moments of vulnerability, confessions their characters never meant to speak aloud. But beneath the acting, Sandra found herself confronting her own truths. Every time she looked at him, every time she felt the steadiness in his voice or the sorrow in his eyes, her walls thinned. In one scene, she was meant to break down, confessing pain her character had carried for years. But as the cameras rolled, her tears came not from the script, but from her own hidden fears. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of losing herself in an industry that demanded so much, the fear of never being enough. She expected the director to stop the scene, to remind her to stick to the lines. But instead, Keanu stepped closer, his voice gentle, his lines altered in the moment to catch her fall. He took her unscripted words and wove them into something that still fit the story. No one else knew it was off script, but Sandra knew. She knew he had saved her again, not by correcting her, but by meeting her where she was. When the director called cut, the crew applauded, unaware of how much of that performance had been real. Sandra, however, could barely breathe. She walked off set quickly, her heart racing. Later, as she sat alone on a bench outside the studio staring at the fading light, she heard footsteps again. The same steady rhythm she had begun to recognize. Keanu sat beside her, placing his notebook on his lap. "You let yourself be real today," he said softly. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It just slipped out." "Sometimes the truth does that," he replied. She looked at the notebook, curiosity pushing past her hesitation. "Do you write your truths in there?" He paused, then nodded slowly. "Some of them." After a long silence, he opened the notebook and handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages. Inside were words written in quiet, careful lines. Not scripts, not schedules, but thoughts, pieces of himself, memories of people he had lost, reflections on the meaning of kindness, notes about resilience, about pain, about choosing humility when the world offered arrogance. She looked at him, eyes wet. "You've been through so much," she whispered. "We all have," he said. "But pain doesn't have to make us hard. It can make us softer if we let it. It can make us see others more clearly." Her heart ached at his words. Suddenly, all the small gestures he had given her, the steadying hand, the protective glance, the quiet presence, made sense. They weren't random acts of kindness. They were the language of someone who had lived through storms and chosen not to let them turn him bitter. For the first time, she felt safe enough to share her own truth. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared I'm not enough anymore. That I've given everything I can, and one day the world will just move on without me." He looked at her, and there was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. "The world will always move fast," he said gently. "But the people who matter, the ones who see you, don't move on. They stay." Her breath caught. Those words weren't just comfort. They were a promise spoken quietly but carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. The rest of the evening blurred. They returned to the set, finished their scenes, and went their separate ways. But as Sandra drove home, her mind stayed with his notebook, with his words, with the way he had chosen kindness over anger, softness over hardness, presence over absence. For the first time, she realized that the blush she had felt on the first day wasn't just about attraction or admiration. It was about recognition. Recognition of a soul that carried storms but still chose to walk gently through them. And now she found herself at a crossroads. Should she keep her feelings hidden, protect the fragile balance of their bond, and risk letting it slip away? Or should she take the risk, step into the unknown, and tell him the truth? The question echoed in her chest as she closed her eyes that night, whispering into the quiet. What if silence isn't enough anymore? The sixth day began in a way Sandra could never forget. The studio was quiet, unusually so, as though everyone sensed that today would not be just another day of filming. The script called for the most vulnerable scene of the entire film, one where their characters finally admitted the feelings they had been hiding. It was meant to be fiction, crafted carefully by writers, but for Sandra, it felt dangerously close to the truth she had been carrying inside her. As she walked onto the set, her heart pounded harder than ever before. She saw Keanu already there, sitting on a wooden chair, staring down at the floor with the same quiet stillness he always carried. But today there was a difference. The notebook he often kept close was open on the table beside him, and though she couldn't see the words, she felt the weight of them even from across the room. Their eyes met, and for the first time she didn't look away. The director gathered the crew and explained the scene. This is where the walls fall. No masks, no shields. Just two people finally being honest. Don't act, just be. Those words struck Sandra's chest like an echo of her own unspoken thoughts. Don't act, just be. But what if being was too dangerous? What if the truth slipped past the safety of their characters? The cameras rolled. The lights softened. The scene began. Her character was supposed to confess first. The words on the page were simple, written to sound fragile. But when she opened her mouth, her voice shook in a way no script could capture. I don't know how much longer I can pretend, she whispered, her eyes locked on his. Keanu's gaze held hers, steady but filled with a depth that no acting class could teach. His line was supposed to be calm, restrained, but instead he paused. The silence stretched longer than the script allowed. The crew leaned forward, unsure if this was mistake or magic, and then softly he spoke. Then don't pretend. It wasn't in the script. It wasn't rehearsed. It was real. Sandra felt her chest tighten, her breath catch. For a moment, she forgot the cameras, the crew, the director. There was only him, and the truth trembling in her heart. The next words slipped out before she could stop them. You make me feel seen when I feel invisible. The director didn't cut. The crew didn't move. They all knew something extraordinary was unfolding. Keanu stepped closer, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. You are not invisible, not to me. Never to me. Her tears fell then, not as part of the scene, but as herself. She reached for him, her hand trembling, and he took it gently, grounding her. The cameras captured everything, but in that moment, neither of them cared. When the director finally called, "Cut," the silence that followed was unlike any other. It wasn't professional admiration. It was reverence, the kind people feel when they witness something pure and unrepeatable. Sandra pulled her hand back slowly, her heart still racing. She feared she had said too much, that the line between character and self had blurred too far. But when she looked at Keanu, he wasn't avoiding her gaze. He was steady, calm, and for the first time, open. After the crew wrapped for the day, she found herself sitting outside near the trailers, the cool evening air brushing against her skin. She thought about everything, the rumors, the blush, the protective moments, the notebook, the scene that had turned into truth. She knew she couldn't keep hiding behind silence. Not anymore. Footsteps approached. Keanu. He sat beside her just as he always did, bringing with him that quiet presence that had carried her through every storm. For a while, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy with all the things left unsaid. Finally, she broke the silence. What happened in there today? That wasn't just acting, was it? He looked at her, his expression soft but unflinching. No, it wasn't. Her breath caught. The words she had held back for so long pressed against her lips. I'm afraid, Keanu. Afraid of what people will say, afraid of losing something important, afraid of this. He reached out, gently taking her hand again. "I've lived enough life to know that fear will always be there. But if we let fear decide, we miss what's real. And what I feel with you, it's real." Her tears came again, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from relief, from the quiet joy of finally hearing what her heart had been whispering all along. She squeezed his hand, her voice trembling but steady enough to speak. "Then let's not hide anymore." The night grew darker, but between them something brighter had begun to glow. It wasn't about headlines or scripts or even the cameras that had captured their truth without meaning to. It was about two people who had found in each other the courage to be seen, fully and without masks. The film would go on. The world would keep talking. The gossip would never end. But none of that mattered now. Because between Keanu and Sandra, something had shifted forever. And in that quiet, in that fragile but unbreakable space between them, they both understood. This was more than a story. This was the beginning of something real.